The through line for me is curiosity. If you stay open and you stay curious and you stay just like kind of committed to expansion and improvement, then the rest kind of follows.
Vanessa, we're so excited to have you today. You are the founder and co-CEO of Another Tomorrow, a brand that is redefining sustainable fashion by creating ethically sourced, transparent, and circular clothing. Before that, you worked in finance for a really, really long time. So we're excited to talk to you about that.
We're going to get right into it because I want to know what it was like trying to quit finance 3 times. Why was it so hard to leave? And like,
why 3 times?
Yeah, why 3 times? And like, what was that like? And what was the moment when you were like, fuck it,
this is the last time I'm quitting?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I mean, finance for me was in many ways an aberration. If you look on my LinkedIn, it's like the biggest chunk of who I am, I guess, by percentage, right? Or what's most public. But I'm actually an Iowa gal. So I grew up initially in Grinnell, Iowa. My dad was originally a sociology professor that got super into technology with Next Computer, which was the company that Steve Jobs started when he got fired from Apple. Their whole go-to-market was higher education, ergo my dad getting involved. And my mom was an artist, like true flower child artist. And so, none of that, as you can hear, like spells finance, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I grew up first in Grinnell and then in northwestern Pennsylvania, another college town. And then I finished my last year and a half of high school in Columbus, Ohio. But, that kind of formative, like Rust Belt, Midwest Rust Belt.
Midwestern.
Yeah, like upbringing was really interesting because on the one hand, it was this like melting pot of progressive thinking, creativity, like very solutions oriented. And then at the same time, I was seeing really kind of like the underbelly of capitalism like in my face, so the longest stretch that I spent in northwestern PA, that was when tons of really high paying blue collar jobs left. You saw that in the social structure of the town. There was a metal detector installed between when I first went to high school and my sister went to high school. Like, it was literally Chemlon all over the place. It was just like, you really had this sense of we got to build a better mousetrap. Now, there wasn't like a business bone in my family. So like the actual ability to build and sell a better mousetrap, I did not have at that time. So I actually went out to Berkeley thinking I was going to be an architect because that seemed like a really cool, multidisciplinary, impactful career to have. And unfortunately, my first semester of my freshman year, my mom died, she took her own life. And that was like a really intense 180, like kind of that I didn't even know was happening. It was sort of just like putting one foot in front of the other. Took a semester off, spent a bunch of time with my younger sister, switched schools, ended up an economics major.
Wow.
And so finance, was really kind of an accident.
Yeah.
It was a flight to safety. It was also really intellectually interesting. And, I found my way into emerging markets finance specifically because, as a small town Midwestern girl, I was like, I want to get the hell out of here and learn about, the world. So there were a lot of pulls, but there was also like a big safety mechanism. And I think that to answer your actual question about why did it take me 3 times to leave, it was a job I had a lot of misgivings about before I even started.
Yeah.
Just because in some respects, I don't think it's bad in any way, but it didn't necessarily embody my whole self. And so that entire 15 years was kind of me trying to figure out a way back home that felt safe. And so each of those iterations was an attempt for me to get there. And it was just this push, pull. And I was given immense opportunity along the way, just immense, and for which I was incredibly grateful. And so it was, until I had a real pull of, oh my gosh, this is what I feel like I'm meant to do, nothing stuck.
Talk a little bit more about that very disruptive event that happened with your mom when you were in your first year. Was that something that came unexpected to you? Was that something that you had witnessed earlier in your childhood, or?
It was throughout my childhood, unfortunately. And, you know, she really struggled with mental illness from the time that, I mean, at least the time that like I knew something was wrong. I was probably like kindergarten, first grade. But that was at a time when, you know, there wasn't open dialogue around it, and there was so much shame. And so it was kind of like just hidden. But yeah, she was in and out of hospitals my entire childhood. And in many respects, when that happened, it was like your worst fear
Yeah.
coming to life.
Totally.
And that had such a profound impact on me that I don't think I understood until like actually relatively recently, because I just went into this place where like any tail risk in life had like outsized proportions in my mind. Now it's like maybe deeply ironic that I worked as a trader in Wall Street, like managing risk.
Managing risk.
Right.
Yep.
Maybe that made me a good risk manager.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of weird. But in life, you know, it kind of created this very like fear-based existence.
Yeah.
And even just like from a, you know, spiritual place, I had such a hard time reconciling, you know, how the fuck is it possible that this can happen and I can have a sense of like a greater universality of good, you know, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like the last really like 25 years has kind of been this journey from like fear to faith. And I think in many ways, like entrepreneurship has really almost forced that because it's just so terrifying on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And you start maybe trusting yourself more and
Yeah.
trusting that things don't always. I can so relate to your story. By the way, my father dealt with a very serious mental health issues and tried to take his life multiple times when I was a kid. And what you're describing around thinking the worst thing would happen and then it happens, like this catastrophizing mindset. I use that term.
Yeah.
I'm so good at that still because really bad things happen so many times that it's hard to let go of that. And then it sounds like that was really something that made you move into a career that felt stable or safe from the outside.
Yeah.
Completely.
But you also said this thing, constant movement and progress felt safe. And I think like even as entrepreneurs, that can feel safe. So when was the moment when you're like, actually, this is not safe. This is me just like churning.
I think I had, there were sort of like a few aha moments, but one was just the complete like unusefulness of fear.
Yeah.
Because I think I felt like, who would I be without it? You know, would I have the fuel? Would I have the drive? You know, would I get up in the morning? And at some point, I also started to reframe that as like, well, what actually would be possible if that were absent from my life? And I really started to see like how destructive and all-consuming like that kind of fear washing machine was. And it took that to kind of like actually like loosen my grip. So that was, I think, one. The other was just recognizing there are so many ways to see the same pattern of facts. You know, like I started to see patterns of resilience instead of patterns of pain, you know. And
How did you retrain yourself though? Because that's really hard.
How
Like
did you gain those
we've
insights?
both kind of had to do that in our own ways, and it's very difficult.
I mean, the kitchen sink, honestly, it's like meditation, incredibly helpful, I think, in giving myself some distance from my thoughts to actually be able to observe them was huge. Enormous credit to my husband, like really just like in addition to just being love of my life, like just an incredible partner and a really like candid, loving one. So just huge gratitude there. And I think also just as we get older, you can start to just like have a lot more empathy for your younger self.
Yeah.
You know, for other people. It's just like a complete reframing. So I think it was a lot of things. And then amazing coaches.
Yeah.
You know, like this is not an individual sport. and friendships. You know, I think some of my closest friendships I've actually built over the last 5 to 7 years because I've been also in a place of like more vulnerability and willingness. So I don't know. I don't have a prescription, but you know, all of the above. But I think really, you know, once you really do understand that we create our own reality with our thoughts, that alone was a pretty like profound wake up moment for me.
Okay, wait. Double click into that. Because I also believe this, but I think it's like people can get stuck thinking that you're just talking about like living in the matrix or something. But can you just talk a little bit more about that, like the responsibility of the thoughts and like how you would see like or how your thoughts would show up in your reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely not like this like kumbaya thing of like, oh my gosh, you're in a crap situation and you change your mindset and everything's like glorious. But I mean, a very simple example was like a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if I woke up on like the wrong side of the bed or what, but I was just like, things were going wrong. I was pissed off. I had like a terrible morning. I was a little short-tempered. I felt bad about being short-tempered. I mean, it was just like the downward spiral. And because that still happens. And it was about noon. And I was like, wait a second, Vanessa. Like, okay. It's like, you are creating this to some degree. And I literally walked out the door, went out to the river, sat my butt down on the grass, like closed my eyes for 15, 20 minutes, did a meditation, and just completely regrounded my energy, like looked at what my assumptions were, appreciated like literally like that moment, that day. I mean, so much of it starts even from gratitude, and it just literally like rewires your brain and gives you a completely different sense of like what's possible. And as soon as you have a different sense of what's possible or a more positive or generous predisposition to other people, your actions follow, you know? And I think that that's the piece that I think I was missing when I often heard that, or even some people miss when they're like, oh, you know, your thoughts create your reality. Well, they do, because your belief system is telling you what is actually possible in the world. And then your actions follow that belief system. And then that creates, you know, what else is happening out there. So, you know, I'm not in like this continuous bliss state by far. But the more I've learned that you can catch yourself, the more opportunities you have to just like open. And I think that's the other thing that I think a lot about is like when you feel like closed and tense versus like when you feel open. And I think that that's also just that sense of like your body and your heart, honestly, like where are you operating from?
I like this analogy thinking about the thoughts. Lorna, who was on this podcast earlier, she talked about how, you know, we have like 70,000 thoughts a day and most of them are garbage.
Total garbage. Total garbage.
And also we choose to hold on to them. They're like little clouds that pass, and some of them we get really stuck on them. And it's like the moment when you realize, wait, that's an option, but I could also not engage with this if I don't want to. It sounds so simple, but it's so powerful. It really works. Obviously, you have to repeat it and train that muscle, but it truthfully really works.
It does. And you just have to give yourself some patience and grace in the process.
I'm so curious, before we talk about Another Tomorrow, just jumping back into the finance career, you worked in risk management in an industry that's very male dominated. How was it as a woman working in that industry?
I mean, it was dual parts awful and fabulous. So I started off as a trader in foreign exchange options. I think the most amazing thing about it was when you're in trading, you have a scorecard at the end of the day. And that is like the ultimate leveler of the playing field. Right. And so that felt like a really empowered position to be in, especially because I was actually given the shot to do it. So like getting given the shot to do it in the first place was like half the battle. And I think at a time, I mean, it was that was kind of awesome. And then there was all the like horrific stuff that was like happening in like the early aughts in the industry, which was, I mean, I still look back in hindsight, I'm like, wow.
Were there a lot of women on your team? Or
No, I was almost always like one of the one of the few. But I hired some amazing women. There were some amazing women who came up before me. Like the woman who was president at the time of the bank actually came out of options trading. So there were some, there were some role models. We were definitely in the minority, but I was also kind of like a fighter by nature. My dad was kind of an ass growing up, and so like I really like duked it out. I mean, we had a loving relationship by the time he passed, but it was tricky. So I was definitely like the older daughter, like firstborn, duke it out. So I think that served me kind of well on the trading floor.
Talk about your sabbatical and how Another Tomorrow was actually kind of like a mistake.
How did that all happen? Okay, so 2016 rolls around, and I got the managing director promotion that was like really meant a lot to me, because that kind of meant like, okay, you made it through the gauntlet, and it was a really brutal time, like for the division, for my team. And I just had to kind of look at myself and just say, okay, Vanessa, like you've made 100 excuses not to follow your passion. You're kind of out of excuses now. So what are you going to do about it? And I couldn't make a move right away, especially because I felt a tremendous like debt of gratitude and actual real responsibility to my team at the time. But I said, okay, like I need to really think about this. And so, by the end of the year, I talked to my boss at the time and said, look, like, I've been passionate about sustainability. I really believe also that it's like good for business. Now, mind you, I had already quit or attempted to quit twice. Failed the first
With
time.
that same boss or
different boss.
Okay.
But like, these guys have been around. They know.
Oh, here she is again.
Yeah, here she is again. Okay. So, this was not a surprise. When I actually left in 2007, it was to go do a degree in energy and environmental policy. So like there was a lot of consistency, and I've been following up on a lot of that on the side. So I really wanted to build, an ESG business. And, for a variety of reasons, there wasn't like the perfect role for what I wanted to do at the time. But at this point, I was like, I really am serious about this. And so I was going to leave, and they're like, take a sabbatical. We know you'll be back. And it was just, I had such an immense amount of like safety and freedom by doing that. I was also still scared because I didn't like technically have a job, but I was on, still on the books. And I was at a conference in California. I think it was a BSR conference. And I was really just kind of not only applying for, ESG roles in finance, and I started to do some early stage investing at that time as well. But I was just really looking at various different industries to really try and more deeply understand the negative externalities. And fashion was one of few that I just like did not touch in finance. It's just, it's too fragmented. It was not systemically big enough to be on the radar screen for most of the companies and countries I was looking at. And I was just shocked. I was like, holy crap, this is a disaster of an industry. And it just, the amount of like talent and resource and vision that was going into solving that challenge relative to what I saw in particular in the energy transition, which is of course like incredibly important, just seemed really misaligned. And I was like, I was really kind of having a tough time with where I was personally going to make an impact. And I felt like in the energy space, especially because I wasn't an expert, I was like, I'm going to be like a drop in the ocean, important, but like, am I really going to be the person to move the needle? I don't know. But fashion was just this like wild kind of like systems problem. And without recognizing it at the time, it also brought together everything I either like loved or was decent, like good at. It was all like the creativity, it was the international supply chains, it was business. It turned out to also be technology, which was something that my dad got me really involved in super young. And so I was like, I think I can rearrange the pieces of this in a different way that feels like a more relevant future for this industry. And it was the first time in my whole life, it was like I'm supposed to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And, or at least I couldn't not do it, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. I was
Yeah,
like, I will
totally.
never forgive myself
If you don't try.
if I don't try. I would
Yeah.
rather try and fail than not try. And so
How did you know though? Like, what was the feeling? Because you say like I was really called to do this. Like, what was the? Was
I
there
could
like an
just
inner
see
voice
it.
or?
I don't know. I was just
Yeah.
like, it was just sort of like this knowingness of like, I can just like see this thing
Yeah.
taking shape.
Yeah.
And I couldn't turn away from it. Like I had a job opportunity that came up that on paper looked like the exact thing
Yeah.
that I thought I wanted when I started the sabbatical. And when I imagined myself taking that and turning my back on this, and this was even like this thing that didn't even fully have a shape yet, didn't have a
Right.
name, like wasn't even clear. I was like, I can't. And it was, I think that was the knowingness. And then from there, I did a tremendous amount of research and brought on some incredible partners before I ultimately had the confidence to like actually pull the plug on the sabbatical.
Yeah.
And I then like didn't get a decent night of sleep for like a year and a half because I was so terrified. But that was this sense of like, I can't turn my back on this.
Yeah.
There's something here. Honestly, I wish that I could tell you that I had this like structured approach and I went to my like network in a certain way. I knew one person in fashion.
Right.
I had no business whatsoever doing this. And so I look back and it's just, I was really lucky because I had no idea what I was doing. So, I mean, the first person I brought on to help, we were introduced actually by our doctor.
No way. No way.
Yeah, who was deeply concerned about me because she was like, why are you torching your career? And I was explaining to her, you know, she's kind of like a second mother to me. I mean, she really was like worried. And, but then she kind of said, okay, fine. Like if you're insisting on doing this, then I have somebody for you to meet. And she was just coming out of a really big CMO role with a brand. And we sat down and we met. And, you know, she basically taught me like brand building 101, like literally. So that was incredible. But then, you know, the whole reason I was doing this was really coming from the perspective of, you know, helping to reinvent an industry from the perspective of like impact and resilience. And so clearly the sustainability piece was going to be like our center of gravity. And so the next two people I brought on are really kind of in parallel, like a month later, once I realized, okay, maybe I'm actually going to do this thing. A woman, Natalie Grillin, who was ended up becoming our first head of sustainability. Amazing. And I met her through a woman in sustainable finance at a conference. So like, I didn't know. And then Tobias Soriano, who ended up becoming our first head of VP of production. And those two just had like deep roots in sustainability in the industry. And so the first scope was really, you know, doing an in-depth analysis of like science-based, best-in-class practices around human, animal, environmental welfare, which was a critical foundation for creating a matrix of decision-making that we still use to this day. I mean, it evolves obviously as technology and materials and just science evolves, but that was really like our foundation.
Yeah.
And then from there, I found some amazing, with Melissa, who I was working with on the branding side, found some amazing agencies, did a bunch of market research with an incredible woman, Dee Dee Gordon. And then really our first creative director came through one of the agencies that we had been discussing with. And so the team kind of built itself really organically, kind of one foot in front of the other. And I did it like, you know, totally bootstrap style where like, you know, I was paying the bills. I was only bringing people on when I absolutely needed them.
necessary.
So you were personally funding this?
Oh, yeah.
From the beginning. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But I think that like that was actually a learning is I think because it was such a new industry for me and I had such a keen sense of like not knowing the first thing about it. I was just like, what business do I have like raising capital for this idea?
Wow.
Newsflash, people do that.
I was
all
gonna
the
say
time.
such a woman thing to
It's
say.
such a woman thing. Oh,
I know.
completely. Like,
I know.
and that's why, like, I'm sort of like, yeah, you know, it's great, and there are other less personally risky ways of doing
Totally.
things.
Yes, that's
and
true.
you know, everyone's in a different situation. So yeah, I mean, but I was
Yeah.
incredibly grateful
Yeah.
to have the time, to have the resources for that early
Yeah.
development, because it was crucial.
And I guess one of the benefits is also it gave you real control in decision making, which is something.
100%.
Yes, there's something de-risking with bringing in outside investors, but then you're also giving up decision making. And I think when I hear the birth story of your business and your brand, it's so mission driven.
Yeah.
And that gets quickly diluted when you bring in, especially more traditional VC investors.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is a true compromise when it comes to top line and profitability, oftentimes at the early stages, especially in consumer products.
Yes.
So it gave you the ability to really imprint the DNA
Yeah.
on this brand.
Oh yeah,
the
and
way you
I
want it
had
to.
seen that, and that was one of my concerns. Like, I had seen, you know, when I was doing the research, I like call it now, I was doing like graveyard diligence of like what either outright failed or failed to scale, and why, like what were the through lines. And I also considered in that group of failures brands that launched and ended up deviating from their mission in material ways. And that was one of the reasons, was like taking on institutional money way too early in the life cycle, or
Interesting.
the wrong institutional money. Because I don't think there's necessarily like a bad thing about that, but it's so I really wanted to be able to launch with the product and the brand and its kind of like full form commercially, demonstrate that viability, and then raise capital. Now, I had not necessarily foreseen COVID.
Yeah. Oh my
We launched
God.
right before COVID, and we were not making sweatpants. So that was a more difficult early stage kind of raise, but we made it through the gauntlet.
Can you talk a little about that? I would love to put a pin in it, because especially as somebody who had to overcome anxiety and fear and catastrophizing, how was it to launch a business and then the pandemic hit and that profoundly changed the trajectory of what you were doing? Can you talk about how you navigated that personally, emotionally?
Well, it was when I ended up with my second to last coach, basically, because a couple things happened. One was, you know, I was like finance gal, like built for speed at that point. You know, I had like 15 years of trading floor under my belt. And so the idea of like putting the brakes on anything was like deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so that was one, but that was 100% the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But there was sort of like an ego thing associated with slowing down growth, because especially in like VC world. So I had to like really kind of unpack that association. And then the other thing was like my leadership style was just totally not working. Like,
Interesting.
totally not working.
Say more.
I was so used to just being like, okay, we're going left, and like everyone turned left, you know?
Yeah.
It was like, okay. And I could just see it. Like, these are the things that we have to do differently now. And these are the hard decisions that we have to make. And it was like, okay, like, boom, we got to go left. And it was sort of like, it was like left. And it was sort of like,
Do you feel like that's a fashion thing, or did you feel like that was just a COVID thing?
No, well, I think it was both. I think it was, and I think I was just, you know, when you're working in finance, like incentive structures are very different.
Yeah.
You don't have as much diversity of like roles, in particular, not roles, right? So you've got a lot of people kind of doing similar things with a very clear end goal, and it's easier to pivot.
Yeah.
And in this case, you know, it's an organization that is formed of, you know, highly differentiated roles and responsibilities, and it was also just a very like emotional time for people, you know. Totally. So I think that kind of communication, and I mean, I don't want to say like consensus building necessarily, but like that very like human leadership piece, I hadn't been well trained for.
Yeah.
You know, and when I first took on this coach, I was sort of just like, why isn't this working? How do I make this work?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
But really, you know, I was the one who had to change. Not entirely, but, you know, I really had to develop very differently. So it was a big initial personal growth moment.
On Say More, we've discovered that the best ideas rarely come when you're distracted, uncomfortable, and not fully present in your body. It's nearly impossible to hear that inner voice when you're wrestling with your clothes, especially ones that are made of plastic and that don't breathe. By the way, 60% of today's clothing is made from plastic. That's why I founded The Big Favorite, super soft, 100% Pima cotton tees, underwear, and other essentials for men and women. They're simple, well-made, and designed for fit and comfort, sure to become a new favorite, so you can focus on the things that matter, like letting a good idea hit. Shop basics and underwear at thebigfavorite.com and use SayMore15 for 15% off your first purchase.
I have to say, I find this really interesting.
Same.
Because I have mostly seen the opposite, people coming from corporate not being able to move fast enough and adjust enough. And I think probably your role in finance, also specifically that type of role,
Trading, yeah.
is maybe one of the unique talent, that unique ways to develop that talent in a corporate job, because I've usually experienced more of the opposite, where it's hard to be nimble and fast when you come and you've worked for a big company with an infrastructure and a big team. So it's interesting that you've experienced, again, a lot of it might have been time, also pandemic, people being existentially threatened, but yeah, that's so interesting.
I think it was a very trading specific thing, because
Yeah.
you're just constantly in the position, like literally constantly in the position of having to make decisions with imperfect information.
Yeah.
I was
Yes.
just like living in a stream of
Comfort
that.
of,
And so you have this comfort of just like, you know, making the best possible decision at the time, risk adjusted with the information available. And so that just comes with, like, you know, I was doing that at 2:00 in the morning even. So I think that there was just a facility with that. And I kind of didn't recognize how sort of like unusual that was.
Yeah. But I mean, there is something to be said for the industry, because like I really wanted to hear sort of your take on what it's like to come into fashion, because, you know, I'm born and bred fashion. Like, I grew up in it. It was my, you know, I went to school for it, and I worked for J. Crew and Tory Burch and Tommy Hilfiger and started 2 companies, and it's a very like complex industry. We're making physical products that fit human bodies, that have very complex supply chains and many different materials on one piece. And it's very it's just a very interesting industry, because it's so old school and it's so tactile, and it's like in person, and it's not digital, and it's not technological, and it's like, so trying to get people to like move in a different direction would already be incredibly difficult. But like during a pandemic, so I'm curious, like what are your takeaways about fashion, and like how can it change? Can it change? I think you guys are, to me, Another Tomorrow is best in class. Like, you guys are doing the things, like, you're gold standard. Like, to me, it's where I want to spend my money, because not only is the product absolutely gorgeous, but it's done in like the best way possible. And like, your commitment to that has never changed. And so I'm curious, like, what's it like coming into fashion and trying to innovate and push things forward?
Well, first of all, I'm like incredibly honored to hear you say that. Thank you.
It's the truth.
It means a tremendous amount from you. And I mean, on the one hand, it's when you can build from a blank slate, it helps tremendously. But I will say, I mean, the thing that I think people really do misunderstand about fashion is just how incredibly complex it is. I mean, the degrees of complexity are insane. And I think to a degree, that's what breeds some of the rigidity of the industry, is because of that complexity. And I think, you know, every startup deals with, you know, how you address the integration of like new ideas with industry expertise. And like, it's kind of always that push and pull. You know, I think fashion is tricky, because, you know, when I first came into it, I had that sort of arrogance of like, oh, like all of this stuff is wrong. Like, why would you do things this way? Well, obviously there's a reason,
Right.
You know, and you do, you know, come to see some of like the efficiencies and the rationale for doing things in a way that might seem, you know, wasteful or slow or what have you, as it pertains to like retailer cycles or like customer desire for novelty or whatever. I think that what's been really interesting for us is, in a way, sustainability constraints actually enforce a degree of simplicity and scalability in the business that actually creates more flexibility and more resiliency. So I think if we were, trying to churn out new collections 4 times a year with like all new materials and what have you, I think the sustainability piece would create more rigidity and just higher costs. But if you're actually saying, how do you rethink the entire system with these principles so that you're not, you're rethinking your merchandising strategy, you're rethinking, the core collection, like what seasonal represents, like how you risk manage those proportions, your distribution strategy, you can actually create a lower risk, more resilient business. And I think that's the direction of travel, because it's either that or it is like truly fast fashion. Where you are like able to bring product to market incredibly quickly in a very data sensitive way that is like not particularly sensitive to any of the cost and negative externalities with it. So I think it ends up being a little bit that barbell, if I'm honest. Because the other models aren't working. Like at all. Basically.
Yes.
So then talk a little bit about your decision to become B Corp certified. Sounds like that was something that happened very early on in the business. What made you want to take that extra step to get that certification?
For me, we wanted to be born that way. And my initial thought process around it was really around enforcing alignment between like the capital side and the business side. So it was basically kind of enshrining our principles in something that was a multi-stakeholder model, and also becoming like legally a public benefit corporation alongside that. So that was my sort of like first thought, because I knew we would take on external capital, and I felt like that was a commitment that everyone would be, clear about around the table. I think that it ended up having some other wonderful benefits as well, and one of them was actually like introspection around, like where are some of the things that we didn't even think about we could do better, that this is like bringing up for us. So I think there have been a lot of different positives. I mean, there's been some questions around like, is the standard stringent enough? Is it evolving in a way that's stringent enough? It's, and I think that especially with, a lot of the European regulation, I think it's shown a spotlight on that. And I think that's a really encouraging moment also for the standard to evolve. Right. But we consider it to be really important, and it's really underpenetrated in fashion.
Yes.
And so that's a conversation we're always really happy to have.
I mean, in terms of sustainability, like I kind of want to underscore like how complex this really is, because, you can get into like the detergent that is used to wash the thread that holds the garment together. And I think the thing that I've been really impressed by with Another Tomorrow is that you guys are so committed to these details. Like the way that I think maybe it was like when we first connected, you talked to me about going to the farms, the sheep farmer, and even her, it was a woman.
Oh, Nan, probably.
Nan. Yeah. Okay, shout out Nan. And just how she handled the sheep was much gentler and mattered to you. And I'd love to just hear like that story, or some other stories you want to share about like the supply chain journey and how and why that really matters to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
all right, so insurance is not exactly the sexiest topic, but when you need it, you really need it.
Oh my God, girl. Yes. When I was running Loopy, I had more than enough horrible claims to deal with. But thank God for Amelia Risk. They were amazing. They picked up my phone calls, listened to me crying, and they had really good rates too.
So if you're a founder, you already have enough to stress about. So let Amelia Risk handle all of your insurance claims while you focus on your purpose and aligning that with your business.
That's right. And for all Say More listeners, you can get a free audit. So just go to ameliarisk.com, because boring things like insurance should still be really good.
First, I think, fashion is such like an amazing way to like reconnect us in general to like the world. But I think for me, the three pillars have always been animal, environmental, and human welfare. And at the outset, with respect to wool, once we understood, very clearly the environmental parameters, if we were going to engage in anything that required animals, it was deeply important to me that we really understood how those animals were treated and what the on-farm culture was, independent of, or I should say, above and beyond certifications.
Are you vegan or?
I'm not.
You're not.
I've been mostly vegetarian most of my life. Well, since college. Not even a perfect vegetarian, but I really believe that I really, believe in the humane treatment of animals, and there was no way that I was going to be able to like systemically support something that required like the harm or killing of an animal.
Yeah.
And once you know enough about like sheep farming,
Yeah,
and
it's
mulesing,
pretty
and all that
brutal.
stuff, it's like, whoa, this is not like fluffy little sheep gets a haircut.
Yeah.
So like my second business trip, I think basically was like to Tasmania, and it was, I think first and foremost, like people don't think about fashion as either an agricultural product or it's made out of plastic or some combination of the two, and maybe on 1% of the time it's like made in a lab or even less. And so this idea of like an agricultural origin in the first place, like that kind of immediately sent us to the farm, because even from a sustainability standpoint, like what makes sense in one region doesn't make sense in another region, like from an ecosystem perspective. And so was really grateful to the nonprofit Fiber Shed. Yeah. They made the early intros. At the time, they had a chapter in Melbourne, which unfortunately I don't think exists any longer, but they were the ones who connected us into the ethical farming community in Tasmania.
Very cool.
And we now have a group of 7 farms that we've built relationships with in a variety of ways. But yeah, we've built personal relationships with all of them. I mean, we were crazy. Or maybe I specifically was crazy. Bought this wool. And we didn't even have like a mill to make fabric with. And then we were,
but you bought it on the yarn level? Or
no.
You
Like
bought it on
literally
the
greasy
fiber level.
wool. Yeah, not even clean.
Wow.
Like greasy wool that had to go from the farm in Tasmania on a boat to Italy.
Wow.
And we didn't have a mill yet who was willing to accept and make fabric with said wool. So, I
love this.
It was crazy. I mean, I think I just am such a stubborn person. And so we were going around to all, and mind you, we narrowed this down to like a group of like really best in class, fabric mills in Italy who we knew could operate at our quality level and hand feel. And our creative director, Jane Chung at the time, give her massive credit for like really enforcing that like quality hand feel standard. But these guys were crazy. It was like, you don't even have a brand yet. Like, who are you? It was, and this one mill was like, they said initially, okay, but it has to be like 10,000 kilograms. Which, as you know,
which
is like
a
massive,
huge quantity.
Massive.
It's a lot.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah. But I was like, that's not a no.
Yeah.
It's not a no. And
Let's go buy more wool.
Yeah. And eventually we like massively negotiated them down to a point that, even as a tiny, practically non-existent brand,
how long did it take you?
I think we showed up like 2 or 3 times. I was just enough to make it clear we like weren't going away.
Yeah.
Right.
And they've been our partners to this day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I just quickly want to underscore, there is very rarely a CEO or co-CEO who can actually talk about where a fiber comes from that goes into the wool that makes the suiting. So I'm just going to give you props there, because that's a huge testament to like how much you really are living your values. And I think a lot of times on this podcast, we talk about how important it is to know who you are, to know why this matters, because it's the thing you get excited to do. You show up every day because you're like committed to the fucking sheep in the field who are growing the wool that are eventually going to become a suit. And I think that's just so amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it makes you a way better business person.
I agree.
Oh, yeah.
Ultimately, because you understand how your stuff gets made. And when you talk to investors or partners, you know what you're talking about. And I think that's just, it's like purpose and profit can work together. That makes me wonder. It just is this question that I've had on my mind, like listening to you speak about this. And it makes me wonder how how systemic change can just happen faster. Like I, start my first business in the food industry. I came in with really high standards and expectations. I didn't want to put my protein bars in plastic wrappers because I was like, why would I create more plastic with this regeneratively sourced ingredient? And there were no options, or there were no options that were accessible or that wouldn't make my product cost $20
Yeah.
for a protein bar. And so I think about that a lot. I grew up in Europe, and I know that regulations are very different. And a lot of that stuff that we're talking about here that's aspirational is more of a default because there is a legal system that's enforcing and a political system that's enforcing certain things. How will this happen in this country that's so powerful and there's so many consumers here? Like, how can we make this go faster?
Just an
a little
easy
side,
question.
It's interesting. I think this is where I have really kind of reoriented myself. And, because I have this kind of also like scale transformation sort of mindset. Like, how do you create like a step change? How do you move faster? And initially I thought, okay, it's all about policy, right? It's all about policy, but policy is a consequence of culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we've undergone like pretty dramatic policy and political shifts since we were even born as a brand, the more I've really started to rethink this. And even just like in my meditation practice, spiritual practice, like we have to re-engineer ourselves at a much, I think, more fundamental level as humans and as culture. Because you cannot just put this top down. And I also think, we've got some really like kind of serious existential, cultural, like humanitarian problems where, this will not be the most important thing until we solve like some really existential issues. So I kind of think you kind of have to parallel process it. And, the more I think about it, the more I do think we've got work to do at just like fundamental levels of like consciousness and connectedness.
Yes.
Because it's hard to give a damn about some of this stuff if that kind of like baseline connective tissue is missing.
Yeah. I always feel like it's like I used to think too that it was about policy, and then I was like, oh, you can't force your way into this. You have to have people to experience something like tangible, and then they begin to appreciate something that is more thoughtfully made or like more locally made or like locally grown food even,
Yeah, we've got to recreate those connections,
Yes.
because we don't even, I was freaking like vegetarian and like driving an EV and whatever else. And it didn't even occur to me to like think about where my clothes came. I don't know. It was just like these kind of basic layers of connectivity and curiosity that I think we've got to re-engineer, but that has to come from a place of like safety too. Yeah. So like, how do we, take care of people, So I don't know. I've moved out of like this hyper intellectualized approach to this to something that feels a little bit more fundamental, even if like slightly less satisfying or quick. I don't know. I think we got a lot of work to do.
Are you stress testing any of that in your marketing?
No. But I've started to change the way that I communicate. I think, and that's just an outgrowth of like me seeing things differently. Like I think and it also comes like from a place of, I don't know, observing myself differently. Like I think coming into fashion, coming into sustainability, I felt like it always had to be this like intellectualized, super scientific answer, that was where credibility lied as well. But like this is a very like very heart-centered work, and I don't think that there's any reason to shy away from that. And that's also how people connect. Like I hate, like no one really wants to hear me talk about like the micron of our wool and like the, ZDHC dyes. I mean, like,
I do.
it's like,
I mean, I'm interested.
I do.
I found the two people and I'm like not knowing.
I know,
but you know
I
what
know.
I mean? Like,
It's rare.
100%.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they,
Totally.
people connect.
Yeah.
Totally.
People connect. And I think that that's really important. So
Yeah.
I've just, I've decided like change starts with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Oh, totally. We
love
all
that.
have agency.
I actually connected with Liz Giardina during one of her, she like put out open office hours. So that this
good,
is
good,
Another
good.
Tomorrow's creative director,
Yeah.
Liz Giardina, who came from Proenza Schooler. And she put out like open office hours on LinkedIn or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, let me just catch up with her. Cause like we have mutuals as well. And there was something that she said to me on that call that has just like stuck with me forever. And she's like, you know what the luxury is? Time. She's like, it's time. Because I want to look at my closet and I want to know exactly what's going to work for me and be beautiful and be there for me and foundational, that I can have time to go do the things that are really important to me. And I was like, holy shit, this is so amazing. Like, she's right.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of what your line does is it just cleans it up. Like in the course of the interview, you've mentioned a few things, that you're stubborn, that you don't take no for an answer. You were built for speed early on. And you also said you're hard to manage, but I feel like it makes you a really good entrepreneur. And so I'm just curious your thoughts on that. And like, I know you've said that you've kind of like come full circle in your leadership style, but just curious to hear about that journey a little.
I think that the most important thing that shifted for me in going in particular from finance into fashion was, in finance, I always felt like I had to have an opinion. I was supposed to be like the smartest person in the room, which is, I don't know, like a fairly insufferable, I think. And moving into a completely new industry, I was sort of like by definition the least knowledgeable person in the room, which didn't mean that like I shouldn't have a vision and a conviction, but I didn't need to have an opinion on everything. Mm-hmm. And fundamentally, I think building a team of people who are far more expert in any domain of expertise than myself has been, really wonderful. I still had a lot of learning to do in terms of like, how do you take feedback and evolve while still like staying true to like what you see and what you believe? And I think that's the dance as an entrepreneur, because you want the business to continuously get better. You want to continuously get better, but you don't want to waffle, know. And so I think that's that dance. And I think just like the through line for me is kind of like just curiosity. Mm-hmm. If you stay open and you stay curious and you stay just like kind of committed to expansion and improvement, then the rest kind of follows, versus like, oh, I have to know and I have to like have all the answers. And there's a sort of like rigidity to that, mm-hmm. that like kind of actually keeps you sort of trapped. So I think that's been the evolution for me. And that's a hell of a lot easier and more fun to do when you have a sense of like flow and faith.
Yeah.
Right.
Then like, oh my gosh, I have to white knuckle everything.
Yeah.
Well, like,
or control it.
Or control. Or
Yeah.
like, and that's like, you think you're controlling it.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just an illusion that's like ready to break. So yeah, I think that's been really big. But I'm still like a pain in the ass, and I'm still, I think, perseverance is probably like one of my core personality traits in life. Mm-hmm. So
isn't that just like being a woman in business though? Like we talked to Lorna about this. It's like
of,
just like being a woman, like you're kind of a pain in the ass just because nobody is.
You have to.
Yeah, you just are.
I like to pick an uphill battle or two, but yes. Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, a few rapid fire questions to close it up. What would you say is your life's purpose, and how does that align with your business?
I think all of our lives' purpose, like at this point, I think this is going to sound maybe cheesy, but I think it's really like about love and figuring out how you as an individual express that in like the unique way that you can.
Great.
And that's how, right now, that's another tomorrow.
What is your definition of success?
I think peace,
Love that.
having a sense of like peace in your life.
Okay. And any things that you recommend we read, listen to, books, movies, things that you're really excited about right now?
So I read a book called, I love this book. It's a little dark, but I still recommend it. Called A Constellation of Vital Phenomena.
And
And
sounds like
It does.
something
Sounds
you would
my
like.
my alley.
It's this writer, Anthony Mara. And there was a part at the end for me that was really, really important about like reframing our existence and how we view life. So I'm also reading like a book about AI, but I think this is more interesting.
Right?
It's amazing. Amazing. Where can we find you? Tell everybody.
So Another Tomorrow, you can find us at www.anothertomorrow.co, at Another Tomorrow on Instagram. We're on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I have office hours on LinkedIn.
Amazing.
That's about it.
Thank you
you so
so
much.
much.
This is
Thank you so much
This
for
is
having me.
awesome.
It was a real pleasure.